The night before my 29th birthday, I woke up at 14 inches the morning, with my heart slamming against my ribs. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, trying to slow my breathing. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels thick, like it's pressing against your ears. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed red. 3:14. I hadn't set an alarm. There was no reason for me to be awake, but I was, completely, jarringly awake. And I could still see my mother's face. In the dream, she had been standing in my kitchen right next to the window where she used to keep her herb garden when I was little, before she got sick, before everything changed. She looked the way she did when I was maybe 12 or 13. Her hair was dark, no gray in it yet. Her eyes were clear. She wasn't coughing. She wasn't thin. She just looked like my mother, the version of her I kept in the part of my memory I didn't visit too often because it hurt too much. She had looked right at me and said, very quietly, very calmly, like she was reminding me to take an umbrella before a rainstorm, "Don't wear the bracelet your brother brought you." Then I woke up. I sat up in bed and pushed my hair off my face. My hands were shaking a little. I told myself it was just a dream. That's what you tell yourself. You say it's just a dream. It doesn't mean anything. Your brain was processing something. Stress does strange things to your sleep. I had been under a lot of stress lately. That was true. There were 100 reasonable explanations, but my mother had been gone for 4 years, and in 4 years, I had dreamed of her exactly twice. Both times, she just stood in the background of some other dream, not saying anything, not doing anything, just there, the way she always was, quiet and steady and watching. She had never spoken to me in a dream before, not once. I got up and went to the kitchen and drank a glass of water. I stood at the same window she had been standing at in the dream. The herb garden was gone. There were just curtains now, white ones I had bought at Target 2 years ago. I stood there for a long time looking at nothing. Then I went back to bed and told myself to forget about it. I almost did. Almost. My brother had shown up 2 days earlier, which was already unusual. My brother and I were not close. We had not been close for a long time. When my mother got sick, he was living in Phoenix, and he stayed in Phoenix. He called sometimes. He sent flowers when she passed. He flew in for the funeral, stayed for 3 days, and then flew back. In the 2 years after that, I heard from him maybe 6 times. Birthday texts. A Christmas card once. A random Tuesday phone call last spring that lasted 11 minutes and mostly consisted of him telling me about a new job. So when he showed up on my doorstep on a Thursday evening with a bottle of wine and a small gift bag, I was not immediately suspicious. I was mostly just confused. I was in town, he said, which was the kind of thing people said when they didn't want to explain why they were really there. I let him in. We sat at my kitchen table and drank the wine and talked about nothing much: his job, my job, the neighborhood, some aunt we both liked who had moved to Florida. It felt almost normal. It felt like the version of us that might have existed if things had gone differently. When he was leaving, he handed me the gift bag. "Early birthday present," he said. "Mom would have wanted you to have it." I looked inside. It was a bracelet, gold, delicate, with a small charm on it that I recognized immediately. A tiny bird. An oriole. My mother had a thing about orioles. She said they were lucky. "Where did you get this?" I asked. My voice came out strange, a little flat. "Found it when I was going through some of her things," he said. "Been meaning to get it to you." I nodded. I said thank you. He hugged me, which he almost never did, and then he left. I set the bracelet on my dresser and looked at it for a while before I went to sleep. That was Thursday. By Saturday morning, after the dream, after my mother's voice, after lying awake at 3:14 inches the morning with my heart pounding, I was standing in front of my dresser looking at it again, and I was not looking at it the same way. I want to be clear about something. I am not a superstitious person. I have never been to a psychic. I don't read my horoscope. I believe in science and evidence and things you can hold in your hand and test. I work as a research coordinator at a university medical center. I spend my days reading clinical studies and managing data. I am not someone who acts on dreams. And yet, I stood in front of that dresser for a long time. The bracelet was exactly right. The oriole charm was exactly the kind of thing my mother loved. The gold was delicate, the kind of quality she had. But here was what I kept coming back to. My brother had not set foot in my mother's house after her death. I was the one who had gone through her things. I had spent 3 weekends boxing up her clothes, her books, her kitchen, her jewelry. I had cataloged everything. I had kept what I wanted to keep, donated what I could, and stored the rest. I knew every piece of jewelry my mother owned. I did not recognize this bracelet. That didn't have to mean anything. My mother had things I didn't know about. People had things their children never see. It was possible. It was completely possible. But I stood there looking at it, and I thought about my mother's face in the dream, how clear and calm she had looked, how certain her voice had been. And I thought about the fact that my brother, who had not called me in 2 months, who had barely spoken to me in 4 years, had shown up on a Thursday night with wine and an early birthday present and a story about going through our mother's things. I did not put the bracelet on. Instead, I went and got a pair of latex gloves from under my bathroom sink. I had them because I used them at work sometimes. I put them on before I picked the bracelet up. I turned it over in my hands. I looked at it under the lamp. I looked at the clasp, the links, the small oriole charm. Everything looked normal. Everything looked fine. But there was something about the charm. The back of it had a very slight residue, almost invisible, barely there, like a faint coating. I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't been looking closely. I wouldn't have been looking closely if I hadn't been wearing gloves. And if I hadn't been wearing gloves, I would have just picked it up with my bare hands and turned it over the same way and felt nothing unusual and probably put it on. I set it back down on the dresser and stood there with my gloved hands and thought about what to do. I called my friend who worked in the chemistry department at the university. We had been friends since grad school. She was the kind of person who kept weird hours and answered her phone on weekends, which was one of her better qualities. I need a favor, I said. I need something tested. She didn't ask a lot of questions. That was another one of her better qualities. I drove to campus with the bracelet in a small Ziploc bag, still wearing the gloves to handle it. I felt slightly absurd the whole drive over. I kept telling myself I was probably wrong. I was probably overreacting. My mother had appeared in my dream and said something strange, and I had let it get inside my head, and now I was driving across town on a Saturday morning to have a piece of jewelry tested, like some kind of paranoid person. But I also kept thinking, what if I'm right? My friend met me in the lab. She raised her eyebrows when she saw the gloves and the Ziploc bag. You want to tell me what this is about? She said. Not yet, I said. Can you just tell me if there's anything on this? Any kind of coating? Any chemical residue? She looked at me for a long moment. Then she took the bag and said, give me a few hours. I went and got coffee and sat in my car in the parking structure and tried to read something on my phone and failed completely. I sat there for 2.5 hours thinking about my mother, about my brother, about the 4 years of near silence, about the way he had hugged me when he left that unusual, almost formal hug and said, take care of yourself, okay? In a voice that sounded like it meant something else. My phone rang. You need to come back in, my friend said. Her voice was different, careful. The bracelet had been coated. Not on all of it, just the charm. On the back, the part that would rest directly against the inside of my wrist when worn. The coating was a compound she didn't immediately recognize, but what she could tell me right away was that it was designed for transdermal absorption. Through the skin, slow release, she thought, which meant it wouldn't cause an immediate reaction. It would be gradual. Gradual, like what? I said. She looked at me across the lab table. I need to run more tests to know exactly what this is. But the mechanism, a skin contact application, slow release, starting on the inside of the wrist where the veins are close to the surface, this is not an accident. This is intentional. I sat down on a stool. The lab was very cold. I had not brought a jacket. Someone put this on here on purpose, I said. That's what I'm telling you, yes. I sat with that for a moment. I thought about my mother standing in my kitchen in the dream, her dark hair, her clear eyes, her voice so calm, so certain. Don't wear the bracelet your brother brought you. I need you to document everything, I said. Everything you found so far, everything you're going to find. I need a written record of all of it. My friend was already nodding. I know, she said. I already started. I did not call my brother that day. I thought about it for a long time and decided against it. Here was my thinking. If I called him, and I was wrong, if there was some bizarre, innocent explanation for all of this, then I had accused my brother of something unspeakable based on a dream and a chemical analysis I didn't fully understand. Yet, that had consequences. That kind of accusation doesn't just disappear. But if I called him and I was right, I would be tipping him off. He would know I hadn't worn it. He would know something had gone wrong with his plan. And then what? So I said nothing. I went home. I put the Ziploc bag in the back of my closet. I put the gift bag my brother had brought it in on my dresser, empty, so that if he came by or asked, it would look like I had taken it out and put it somewhere. I made dinner. I watched television without seeing it. I went to bed. I lay awake for a long time thinking about my brother. Not with anger. Exactly, the anger came later. What I felt first was something closer to grief. The kind of grief that happens when you find out something about a person you loved, and the discovery doesn't just hurt you in the present, it reaches back and changes things that already happened. It makes you look at old memories differently. It makes you wonder what was real. I thought about when we were kids. I thought about him teaching me to ride a bike in the parking lot behind the grocery store. I thought about him at our mother's funeral, standing next to me at the graveside, his hand briefly on my shoulder. I thought, how long have you been planning this? And then I thought, why? The why came 2 days later, from a place I wasn't expecting. I had decided to do some research of my own. Not dramatic research, just the kind of digging you can do from a laptop. The kind anyone can do if they know where to look. My brother's finances had always been vague to me. He talked about work in general terms. He always seemed fine, stable, comfortable enough. Not rich, but not struggling. Except that I had a friend from college who worked in real estate law, and she had mentioned once, casually, that my mother's house was still technically in a trust, and that the terms of that trust had a clause I hadn't fully understood at the time. Something about surviving children and property rights, I called her. It took about 20 minutes of careful conversation for the picture to become clear. My mother's house, the house we had grown up in, the house that still had a small mortgage on it, the house that sat on a piece of land in a neighborhood that had appreciated considerably in the last decade, was worth significantly more than it had been when my mother died. And under the terms of the trust, if I died before the trust was formally dissolved and the property transferred, my brother stood to inherit my share. The whole thing would pass to him cleanly. No dispute, no process, clean. If I died. I sat at my kitchen table after I hung up the phone, and I felt the room tilt slightly, the way it does when something becomes real that you had been hoping wasn't. My brother was in debt. I didn't know the details, but my real estate friend had done some careful looking and found enough. He had been in debt for a while. He had made some bad decisions and borrowed money from people who were not patient about being paid back. And he needed a solution that was significant enough to make the problem go away. My mother's house was significant enough. My death was the fastest path to my mother's house. I went to the police on Wednesday morning. I brought everything. My friend's lab documentation, her preliminary findings on the compound, which by then she had identified more specifically a synthetic toxin that accumulated slowly and caused symptoms that looked, in early stages, like a neurological condition. The gift bag, photographs I had taken of the bracelet in the bag, my own written account of everything that had happened from the moment my brother arrived at my door. The detective who took my report was a woman named Reyes, who had the manner of someone who had heard a lot of things and was not easily rattled. She listened to everything I said without interrupting. When I finished, she looked at the documentation my friend had provided and then looked back at me. "You wore gloves when you handled it?" she said. "From the beginning," I said. "I never touched it directly." She nodded slowly. "That was smart. My mother told me not to wear it," I said, and then immediately felt strange saying it out loud in a police station. Detective Reyes looked at me. She didn't say anything dismissive. She didn't look at me like I was unstable. She just said, "Well, whatever the reason, you didn't wear it. That's what matters." What happened after that moved faster than I expected. The lab documentation was compelling enough that they moved quickly. My friend's analysis was thorough. The compound was identifiable. Its presence on the bracelet was documented and photographed by people who knew how to do that properly, and the chain of evidence was intact because I had been careful from the start. My brother was brought in for questioning on Friday. I know some of what happened in that room because Detective Reyes told me later, in the careful way that detectives tell you things, which is to say partially and with caveats. He did not immediately confess. He tried several explanations. He said he hadn't known anything was on the bracelet, that he had found it at a flea market, that he had just thought I would like it, that he didn't know what they were talking about. The debt was real. The people he owed money to were real. The property value was real. The trust clause was real. And the compound on the bracelet was not something that ended up there by accident. By Saturday, he had stopped offering explanations. There is a thing that happens after something like this, which no one really prepares you for. People talk about shock and anger and relief and grief, and all of those things are true, but they tend to happen in the wrong order and at the wrong times, and mixed together in ways that don't make sense. I cried in the cereal aisle of a grocery store on a Sunday morning 2 weeks later for reasons I couldn't have explained. I was fine in the detective's office. I was fine when my friend called to check on me. I was fine on the phone with the attorney, and then I was not fine in the cereal aisle. That's how it works. What I kept coming back to, in the weeks after, was the bracelet itself, the specificity of it, the oriole charm, my mother's thing, her symbol, the bird she loved. Whoever had designed this, whether my brother had help, whether someone else had told him what would matter to me, had known enough about my mother to use her against me. To take something I associated with her, something that would make me feel close to her when I looked at it, and make it into the thing that was supposed to hurt me. I found that harder to sit with than anything else. But here is the other thing I kept coming back to. My mother had used it too. Whatever a dream is, whatever it means, whatever is or isn't on the other side of that, she had gotten there first. She had taken the thing that was supposed to be used against me, and she had turned it around. She had shown up in my kitchen, looking young and healthy and clear-eyed, and she had said, "Don't wear the bracelet your brother brought you," in a voice as calm as if she were reading from a grocery list. I don't know how to explain that. I'm not going to try. I just know that on a Saturday morning, a few weeks after everything had settled, I drove to the cemetery where my mother was buried. It was early, before most people were there. I sat on the bench near her headstone and I talked to her for a while. I told her what had happened. I told her that I was okay. I told her about Detective Reyes, and my friend in the chemistry lab, and the attorney. I told her I was going to be okay, and I told her that I had kept the bracelet. Not to wear, I would never wear it, but because it had been found in evidence and eventually returned, and I had decided to keep it as a reminder, not of what my brother had tried to do, of what she had done instead. I sat there until the morning got warm and other people started arriving with their flowers and their quiet voices. Then I drove home and made coffee and called my friend who had done the lab work and asked if she wanted to get breakfast. She said yes. That's where I'll end this. Not with a door closing, not with a verdict, not with a neat lesson wrapped in a bow. Just breakfast with someone I trusted, on a regular morning, in a life I still had, because my mother showed up in a dream and told me, very calmly, exactly what I needed to know. That's enough. That's more than enough. If you've lost someone and you've had a moment like that, a dream, a feeling, something you couldn't explain, I believe you. Leave it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight.